Hello, everyone. My name is Armando Perez-Carreno, and welcome to the Web Talk Show. Today we have Christina Spaulding with us from Manzanita Marketing. How are you, Christina?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on the show, Armando.
It's my pleasure, Christina. You work with localization, international content strategy, super important topic nowadays. It's always been, but ever more present today with the web and everything that's happening, even with AI, which we might talk about as well. So can you give us a little introduction to how you got into localization, SEO, and content strategy?
Oh, boy. um, in grade school, I was given the opportunity to learn French. And I thought, okay, that sounds great. I think my family is French. Um, my family is not French. There's no trace. We're German and Swiss and a whole bunch of other things, not French. Um, but my parents indulged me and said, sure, go ahead, take French classes. Why not? I was privileged enough in high school to have a high school that also taught German. So my dad said, well, we are actually German, so you should take German. I said, but I'm taking French. And he said, but you have to take German. So I took both. And I thought, well, this is something unique. Maybe I can sell this skill somehow. So in college, I majored in French and German, picked up a marketing minor. And 2 weeks after graduation, I was fortunate enough to get an internship in southern Germany, where I was living and working at a German company, and I wound up staying for 6 years. So I actually worked for a localization translation company as a project manager very early on in my career. So I know the nuts and bolts of old school translation processes. So translation management, translation memories, Trados, version maintenance, having to work with what was then called desktop publishing, right? Work with the graphic designers to ensure that these print materials that we were creating, instruction books for laptop computers and things like that, you had enough space on the page for all the content. As you may know, Spanish is like 1.5 to twice as long as English. German's like twice as long as English. So when your source material is in English, you have to build in buffer in a graphic design if you're doing
Oh,
print
yeah.
work, so that you can allow for those breaks and stuff to happen without breaking your entire design. So that was 2001. So sharing my age a little bit, but that was kind of the kickoff for an international based career. As I mentioned, I was in Germany for 6 years. I also speak French, studied French, was in France, but came back to the US and worked for a German company that had just recently expanded into the US. I was one of their first employees in a team of 4. We grew from 4 to 12 to 60. And they hired me because they're like, we really want to do well in the US, but we're nervous about our English skills. And I was like, your English skills are great. What are you talking about? But they really wanted somebody native who understood the culture as well as the fine details of how you express yourself. And it was a good investment for them because we were successful. We grew revenue 40% year over year for 4 years. But for me, what that showed is it's always helpful and often critical to have a native speaker in the loop, no matter what you're doing. If you're going from one language to another, having that native speaker just gives you the full cultural context. It gives you the idioms, it gives you the slang, it gives you the phrasing that, while not incorrect, just as a native speaker, you read it and you go, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, if
Yes.
you want to eliminate that minute, a native speaker will smooth that out.
That's amazing. I always bring that up whenever I see a document, a poster, a site where it's in Spanish, but you know what? Like it has mistakes. It's clear mistakes that any native or close to native would be able to see it just right off the bat. So I always tell people like, why didn't you just ask someone? You're gonna print. You're gonna spend this money printing this material. Why don't you just anyone? Just call someone. Just you can even call someone random in that country and ask them, does this sound right? And they'll tell you it doesn't. So that's an excellent thing to consider. The recently there's this well it's not now they have a podcast, but it's this sort of man on the street interview type TikTok or Instagram Reels or whatever show called School of Hard Knocks. And it's this guy, he's going interviewing billionaires, and he the one of them stuck with me. There's this guy he meets in the street, and he's a billionaire, but he's in I think he's in the UK or somewhere in Europe, and he says one of the reasons he made so much money was that his plumbing company, when they opened up in the US, he put in someone from the US to manage it and everything. So the head of the company had to be from the States because everything around it, because otherwise, and he got a mentor telling him that he had to do that. But it makes perfect sense because otherwise people are like what why is this guy from over there giving us this or trying to lead this company that's for more sort of a locally kept thing, right? So that makes a lot of sense. How did you mentioned at the very beginning that you started learning these languages and you started, oh, maybe I can make a service out of this. Like at an early age you were already thinking, how can I make were your parents entrepreneurs, or where did you get that spark?
Yeah, actually, my dad was an entrepreneur. He was in the insurance industry. He actually worked from home a lot. So, some of my earliest memories are my dad sitting at the kitchen table with stacks of papers all around. Um, I mean, that meant he was very active and present in mine and my brother's life. And I think he didn't do it on purpose. It was never like you should be an entrepreneur, but he he walked the walk
Hmm.
of doing the work wherever it needed to be done, however it needed to be done to succeed and to take care of his family. So yeah, it was not a you should be an entrepreneur and we're a line of entrepreneurs, but a subconscious thing of there's dad doing the work, there's dad doing the work, there's dad doing the work. It doesn't have to be always in an office, but you got to do the work to get the good things that you want.
Hmm. That's so true. And it's very interesting that you started with that idea of how can I do something with this and then went after it. Some people decide, yeah, that's a nice thing. Maybe I can do something with it. And then they don't do anything about it. They don't move to Germany, right? Like, what was that like? How did you decide to just take the jump or take the leap and move so far away?
Well, I already had a bunch of little jumps before that.
Mm.
I had a professor in my freshman year of college who said, "Hey, you should apply for this study abroad program in Quebec City, Canada." And I was like, "I'm a freshman. Why should I apply?" And he's just like, "Do it." And I was like, "Well, okay, the worst that can happen is they say no." So I applied and I got in. So my first jump was a summer in Canada. Coming from Chicago, that's not a far jump. Easy. It's more of a cultural jump because in Quebec City, the 99 of them percent of them speak French.
Mm.
If you speak English, you're a tourist and you're treated as such. So then the next jump was a full semester abroad in France with my university. So a little bit longer time
Hmm.
abroad, further away, which I truly enjoyed. It was super fun. If anyone listening has kids or is in college and you have a study abroad program option, do the study abroad program option. um, Whether no matter where you go, you will learn something interesting about human beings. You'll learn something about cultural. You'll learn about how people live their daily lives. How people live in Europe is dramatically different than how we live in the US. How people live in Asia is dramatically different from how people live in the US or Europe or South America. South American folks also have a different lifestyle than almost anywhere else. So you will, if you're open to it, you will learn something important. And if you take that and apply that to your life, you can make your life better by taking the best of what other countries do and combining it with the best of what you can do in the US and really shape a life that is tailored to you. So the last step was off to Germany, but I didn't do that without support either. There's a college student group called AIESEC, AIESEC. It was started in France. It's completely student run. And what they do is they find internships for international students with local companies in their area.
Oh, wow.
So the students go out to the companies and talk to the companies. The students go out to other students and recruit other students as potential interns. The students find housing for interns when they come. They do all of it. They organize everything. It's an amazing group. If you have an AIESEC chapter near you, get involved. Like whether you're a business owner, whether you're an interested person, whether you're a student, it's a great way to find international opportunities and really motivated individuals. So one of my friends was an AIESEC member, and she's like, "You should apply for an internship." And I said, "Yeah, I should, shouldn't I?" So I did, and I went through an interview process, and I was accepted. So I flew over to Germany. My local AIESEC chapter welcomed me, got me set up, and I was off to the races. So if you're interested in moving abroad, you don't have to do it alone. There's organizations out there that can help soften the landing and provide you with some friend groups, even in a country like Germany where it is harder to build friendships than it is here in the US for somebody who is not native. But the more you know about the country, the better. But there's resources out there. You just have to look for them, find them, and vet them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was still a culture shock, even though I'd studied German for 8 years, even though I had AIESEC backing me up. Getting over there and actually dealing with the language on the daily, adjusting to life in a small town versus life in an American suburb. It was a lot, but it was amazing. And I had such a wonderful time. Would absolutely recommend AIESEC to anyone interested in international internships.
I'm glad you mentioned that because when you said you went, I was imagining you just getting an offer somewhere and just getting on the plane and going, right? Which sounds frightening for a lot of people. Some people enjoy that thrill, but others don't. So it's great that these types of organizations exist, and I'm sure there's more as well, which is excellent. If anyone knows of any others and wants to share them, drop them in the comments. That would be super swell, because there's a lot, like you were saying, there's so much you learn by being somewhere else, even if it's for a stretch of a few weeks or a month or a few months or years. You're gonna get something back. I remember when I was towards the end of my college years, I went to a supercomputing conference in Hamburg, and I went on my own. I just went, but then I did like a traveling trip around Europe on the trains and just
Yeah.
and it was so fun and so interesting, frightening at times, I guess. If I don't think I was thinking about many of the possibilities, but it was eye opening to see, like you were saying, the culture, how every city is different, how the people behave in the small towns, how transportation is completely different. Places where you would think people might be harder, they turn out to be very soft, and the other way around as well. It's incredible. And having that opportunity or giving yourself that opportunity, I think, yeah, it's excellent advice. I'm glad you shared that.
Yeah. If you want another resource, um, here in the US, the Rotary Club does foreign
Yes.
exchange programs or study abroad programs. So if you don't have an ISAC chapter near you, it is highly likely that you have a Rotary Club chapter near you. So if you're interested, you have a child that's interested, you just know of people, maybe you're a teacher and you're like, oh, I'd love my kids to get this exposure. Talk to your local Rotary Club and see what kind of opportunities that they have.
Oh, that's good advice as well, because I think we've all seen a Rotary Club nearby, but most of us don't have any idea what it is, and we just see it. And if we don't know anyone in it, then it's a complete black box. So I'm glad you mentioned that as well. We're getting a lot of interesting tidbits here. There's something to be said about the cultural context that you were talking about. This is not spoken of as much. There's the translation part, right? Super important. And if those of you who have never done any print or web even design, and you get asked to build something in English, and then they're like, oh, now translate it, and you haven't had that experience where suddenly you don't have enough text, or you have way more text and it just spills all over the page, then you should try it. It's fun. But it's something to think about. But then there's that other part, which is the cultural context, because whether you translate it with translation tool or a thesaurus, or you go to ChatGPT and like ask it, or Claude or Gemini to translate it for you, it might do a good job. Like it might do a very decent job, especially the LLMs now. But there's still cultural contexts involved, and it's very different if you're writing for a Mexican market than if you're writing to a Spanish market or an Argentinian market or a Chilean market. The wording is different, the phrasing is different, and there are slight variations that people can understand. But if you're supposed to be tailoring the content to that country, or you're trying to make them feel attended, they're gonna be like, but is it though? Like,
It's the same as when somebody from the US reads something that was originally written for the UK.
mm-hmm.
We get tripped up on the word jumper and actualization written with an S instead of a Z, or vice versa, and gray with an A or an E. Um, but you had mentioned briefly LLMs.
Yes.
The one thing about LLMs, they're trained first on English,
Mm.
and English does not have a formal informal difference.
Yes. Ooh, that's a
So
good one. Yes.
when you submit queries to your LLM for any language that has different formality levels, you have to tell it what formality level you want. Um, I recently was just like writing a
Yeah.
text message for a client,
Yeah.
um, and my Spanish is not good enough for me to tell them what I wanted to tell them. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to write it in English and then I'm going to throw it into Translate, and we'll see what happens. And the first thing that I see come out says, te da 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 da. And I was like, this is a client. I cannot address them in that way. So like, okay, back to the drawing board. Do we have like a formal version? Is there a plural? Is there anything where that I can look at and see that those markers for informal use are not visible? Haha,
Mm.
there's one. Okay, there we go. That'll get my message through. Um,
Wow. Yes.
but so many other languages, like I think almost all the Romance languages, most of the Germanic languages, um, certain Asian languages have different levels of formality that if the LLM doesn't realize that they exist, or the preponderance of existing material
Mm-hmm.
is informal,
Mm.
then it's going to deliver informal content first.
Wow. That brings up gender too, right? Because Spanish has gender in the language. Like, don't we don't need to get started on actual genders. It's just like you speak differently when you're referring to a female version of a word versus a male version of a word, and all the endings of said words are different because of that. And it's true, English does not necessarily have that. And if it's trained, like you say, mostly on English language, then it might think in English and then translate, which is sort of the wrong way to go about it in some cases. Where if it was thinking in Spanish and then, right, so there's that. And I expect there are translation services that are better trained. We just see right now that's the trend. We see LLMs, we see ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, etc. But there are tools for translation that have existed for many, many years that are amazing, and some have used uh, AI in a sense for decades, right? Those are proper tools to use for anything that's really important, I would say, right? But yeah, there's so many nuances. And then that's just languages that are relatively similar, right? I mean, we understand the letters, the alphabet is pretty much the same, except maybe two or three extra letters here and there. But then what if you go to Cyrillic, and what if you go to Asian languages? That's a whole, they think in a whole other abstraction level than we do, right?
That is so critical. So, one of the things that's super important to me, I think diversity in language is an asset,
Hmm.
specifically because when you start with a different language, you start with a certain mental framework of kind of how the world works. There's a difference between a Spanish language framework because you do have your adjective endings that go through based on gender. So you have a slightly different view of gender and how it works than an English speaker, where gender really only comes up with entities that have obvious gender characteristics,
Mm-hmm.
and then boats and cars for some reason. So um, there's also certain Scandinavian languages that may have started with that like gender thing and have gotten rid of it over time. So,
Really?
um, and I don't remember which one. I think it was Norwegian, where they don't gender their nouns and have the adjective ending stuff that everyone else has. But I am not a student of Norwegian. I'm not a student of Swedish. Um, I could be wrong on that one. So, but one of the Scandinavian languages, I actually looked it up. I was reading a book by a Scandinavian author, and the whole plot centered on the gender of the protagonist, and you didn't realize it until the very end.
Wow.
The book works in English because you could get around it with some
Oh,
gender
yeah.
neutral terms.
Yeah, which would never work.
I think the Spanish and like French translation probably also work, but the translator has to do a little bit more thinking
Mm-hmm.
before, and they have to read the whole thing before they start to translate. Because if they
Mm.
don't, they'll start translating in one way. They'll get to the end and they'll be like, oh, I gave away the ending, or I didn't give away the ending. I led people down the wrong path. It's going to be
Mm.
so much more impactful now. But yeah, so for if we want to stick on LLMs for a little bit,
Yes.
um, LLMs train, it depends on how they train. Um, Most of the time, they train on existing content from the language. And then you have another piece of translation work that happens. So the only caveat I have there is LLMs are trained on web content, right? You can't feed content that isn't online into an LLM, as far as I know. Half of the content on the web is English. So you have a massive amount of English to pull from and to train on. The next largest language segments are about 5% each.
Wow.
That includes Spanish, which is spoken by millions of people, one of the top 5 to 10 languages spoken in the world. 5% of all the content on the web. I believe Russian is also like 5%-ish. Also one of the top 5 languages spoken in the world. Hindu, like 0.1%.
Really?
One of the top 5 languages spoken in the world. But when you think about India, where most Hindu or Hindustani speakers live, there the push is to work with English-speaking tech companies so the content created is all in English and not in Hindu or Hindustani.
Wow.
So for me, that presents a problem. I'm an idealist. I believe the web should be free and open access for everybody to improve themselves, get knowledge, and grow. Now, if half the content in the world is all in English and you don't speak English, that's a barrier to entry. It's a barrier to accessing this knowledge. So how do we fix that? How do we make the web even more democratic, even more powerful for the world to improve? It sounds so cheesy, but we can do this. We can shift by adding more content in languages that are underrepresented.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I'm passionate about is encouraging U.S. businesses to think about translating into Spanish. Before we started recording, we talked a little bit about why should a U.S. business offer Spanish? Well, 15% nationwide approximately. And then in certain cities, I'm in Las Vegas, 30% of Las Vegas speaks Spanish. In Miami, you have an incredibly high majority of Spanish speakers. Cities in California, really high levels of Spanish speakers. So the opportunities are there to reach a lot of people who can become clients, who can learn from you, who can buy products or services. So we start with the commercial stuff because that's kind of the easy fruit. And eventually, hopefully, we can get into research papers and things like that getting translated into other languages as well.
That's an excellent point. I remember when I used to do training on Facebook ads, 2015, around that period. And it was in Spanish. And the reason it was in Spanish was because there wasn't enough content in Spanish. And we wanted to help people learn more. And I remember running the ads. When you looked at the stats in the platforms, you could very clearly see Los Angeles, New York, parts of Florida. They had millions of people that spoke Spanish. So when you were doing targeting, it was like those parts were just packed. And so that's where you would target. You wouldn't target the Midwest necessarily, right? Well, although there are a lot, as well as we learned one time we went there in the middle of a snowstorm. But that's another story. It's incredible that in many places, like the ones you mentioned, there are communities where they just speak Spanish still. And that's okay, because in their community, that's what they speak. So the doctor and the dentist and everyone that does services around that area needs to be able to understand and accept people that speak that language if they want to get that business, because otherwise they're missing out on servicing a lot of people, right? We recently were working on an AI like voice receptionist for a company in California, and a lot of their patients call in and they don't know English. They always want the presiona dos para español feature, right? And so building in the functionality so the agent could speak to them in Spanish was a big plus. And when we did it the first time, what you were saying earlier happened, which was it would work, but it was more of a Spanish, not a Mexican Spanish. And so, and then, but there, you need more of a California Spanish, right? So it's like you have to build in, and so we had the staff go over it with their families and things like that, and build in contextual clues for the tool to be able to say the types of words, informal and the like, to make it work. What has been your experience in these types of situations?
Um, I always advocate for a native speaker to be involved if you're going to
Yeah.
use AI translation tools. Um, in the small experiments that I've done, AI translation tools can be helpful, but they can also go off the rails with where you're like, as a human, you're like, how'd you get from there to there? Because this sentence has nothing to do with what you delivered. So, LLMs, especially um, generative LLMs, hallucinate from time to time.
Oh yeah.
And if you're charting really new territory and bringing in new concepts that aren't already available in the target language at a certain confidence rate, then you're going to get some weird results.
Yeah.
So there's the formal versus informal, which we've talked about. But there's also, if you prompt correctly, you should be able to manage that bit. But there's also we are adding new knowledge to the knowledge graph. LLMs work on a consensus basis. This is a new thing they haven't seen before. They're going to try to apply existing structures, but sometimes they don't quite get it right. So having a native speaker will highlight those things where the sentence is structurally correct. It just doesn't make any sense in the context that you're talking about. It will also, having a native speaker also, as you've mentioned, Peruvian Spanish is different from Cuban Spanish, is different from Mexican Spanish, is different from Spanish. You might be able to prompt some of that. Especially Castilian Spanish versus Mexican Spanish. Like, hey, give me yes versus yes MX. Then you should get a more localized result. But if you're going for one of the other dialects, it's going to be harder for an LLM because the corpus that they're looking at is smaller, right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the rate is on Colombian businesses creating their own content, or Colombian citizens creating content in Colombian Spanish. But I'm pretty sure it's smaller than the number of Mexican companies creating Mexican Spanish or American companies creating Mexican Spanish to target Mexican consumers. So we're getting a little bit of US bias in, if you think about Spanish as all variations of Spanish, to get the 5% versus all variations of English, 50%. Within that 5% slice, how much is Castilian? How much is Mexican? How much is Cuban? I'm going to guess there's going to be quite a bit of Castilian Spanish from Europe, companies marking within the EU. And then there's going to be significant Mexican Spanish because Americans tend to think that if we're going to target to Spanish speakers within the US, it's going to be Mexican Spanish. Not always true, depending on where
Mm-hmm.
you are.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, especially in the East Coast. It's going to be more of the Caribbean island Spanish than Mexican Spanish.
Yeah. So it winds up getting very complex the more granular you try and get. And that's why having a native speaker for whatever you're doing
Mm.
is really going to help you deliver a translation that either is going to be acceptable to the most people or acceptable to the people that you specifically are targeting.
Mm.
You know, if you are a lawyer in Miami and you're trying to get the Spanish speaking clients that live there, then you're going to want to have Miami dialect.
Mm-hmm.
If you are targeting the Cuban population within Miami, maybe you want to have Miami dialect and also a Cuban dialect as well. That's because it's two different dialects in the same geographical area. Now, whether financially you want to maintain 3 web pages for one set of content like it, those are questions that you should discuss internally as an organization. But the question is definitely complex when it gets to Spanish. And who are you targeting? What do they speak? How do we deliver content to them best? Because at the end of the day, you want the people that you're talking to feel comfortable enough to take an action. Sign up for a newsletter, purchase something, go to an event, whatever it is. And if the language doesn't support the trust, then they're not going to take the action.
You bring the having a native speaker concept often, and I don't think people realize the importance of native speakers, not necessarily native to that dialect, right? But native speakers, and the importance in people's lives. We recently had Joshua Gold, he's the CEO from The Big Word, and I didn't know this. They like police departments and all other like hospitals, courts, other government entities around the world contract these types of businesses to have people to translate on demand. So if someone gets arrested or they need help in the hospital, there has to be someone that can translate for them, and they have to actually like, know what they're saying. And the amount of usage of this translation around the world is impressive. I had no idea. I sort of knew because we have a friend in North Carolina that sometimes does that sort of translation services in person in the hospital because they're in sort of the medical space. But the fact that there's this huge organization that serves all of these, that's just one example, a small example of the priority that the governments are putting into being able to assist people, even people they're arresting, right? Then people think, oh, you're very mean to the people you are. Not necessarily. I mean, they're doing the big effort to do this and big expense. So what does that tell us about businesses? Businesses should also take a little bit from that book and see, okay, how can I serve my local audience so that I can provide it? And sometimes we want to, like, it's hard as a business owner. You say, well, I have it in English. Well, I want to maybe put it in Spanish or French or Chinese or German. But having built many websites throughout the years for many clients, building in translation is not the easiest thing, depending on the platforms you're using, etc. It's not like you just add the words. You many times have to add a translation layer. You have to add another service that you put on top of your system that then you can use to add translation. So what are your recommendations in this space? Let's say someone comes in and they say, I understand, I got the point, Christina. I want to go in and add Spanish content, for example. What can someone do in order to achieve that if they already have a website and it might not have localization options?
Start by looking at the platform that you're on. Some platforms have translation tools built in. Like Wix has a translation function So take a look at that, see if that's going to work. I believe Squarespace has a translation function. For WordPress, it's a plugin. There are at least 6 translation plugins that I can think of off the top of my head that you can use. There's free options, there's paid options, there's options that include AI translations, there's options that are like, nope, you're on your own for translation. We're organizing the files for you so that
Mm-hmm.
you can create your hreflang tags, and it's easy to connect like languages together, and your menus are all in the same language, and they go to language pages that match your target language.
Mm-hmm.
I,
Mm-hmm.
if you've developed a few multilingual sites or even one, you realize that, oh, there's a hidden string somewhere in a button or a image overlay that where do I find that little string right there? I can see it. I just don't know where it is in the back end. You have to pull that out. The simpler your site is, the easier it is to translate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The more complicated your site is, the more technically savvy it is, you have a higher risk of like missing one of those sales banners or um, breadcrumbs or field descriptions in a form. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's the little
Yeah.
details that you're like, oh, I forgot to translate name to nombre.
Mm-hmm.
I have to go back in. I have to fix that, because if a Spanish person is reading this and everything's in Spanish and then it's asked for name, telephone, address instead of nombre, teléfono,
Dirección. Yeah.
then
Yeah.
you've built all this trust and then you lose it all in just a second.
Mm.
So,
But you bring up a very important point. It can be relatively easy. So I'll give you an example for those if people want my technical point of view. It could be easy if you just have like an HTML site. So if an
yeah.
HTML site or you vibe coded a site, it's just HTML. Yeah, for sure. And you can even tell your LLM, make sure it's localizable and it'll do it for you. And then all the strings and everything will be localizable. So it's actually easier now than before to prepare it. But if you're using WordPress, like you were saying, there's a lot of nuances in WordPress. Because as you said, you could use what Polylang, WPML, GTranslate, there's Weglot, there's a bunch of different tools. Some of them are good, some of them are not that good. Some of them will affect your performance dramatically. So you need to make sure you have a beefy server to support it. Some of them will duplicate your content, like WPML. If you have products, you'll have like products in English, products in Spanish. Like it'll have
Mm-hmm.
2 actual posts for everything. And then it's good for SEO and other things, but it means you have to manage all of it. And then inventory and other things might become interesting, or any other downstream integrations that you might have become an issue. So why do I bring this up? Because then people like Christina might get customers that say, oh, this looks relatively simple. So for some people, it's going to be simple, but for some people, you're going to have to spend some money to get it done because, like you very wisely said, some things are in the database. Some things are in the actual code. Some things are translatable and some are not, because depending on who built that other plugin that the site is using, or the whoever built the site, if they didn't use localizable strings, which is a technical thing, don't worry about it, people. It just means that it's just gonna say name, and there's no way around that. There's no way to change it unless they put a special type of code that makes it be able to be translated by PO Edit or other tools that allow you to do that. So yeah, it can become a real monster to translate, and then you're having to do some hacks where you're like reading the text in real time and translating it, but that affects performance as well. So many things to consider. And I've found myself wondering sometimes, like, does it make more sense to use a tool like Weglot, right? Have you used Weglot before?
I have.
Yeah. What's your experience like? From what I understand, these tools are more of a layer on top of, and they allow you to do all that translation off your site, so you not affect performance, but at the same time, it just brings everything up when it's needed, right? Is that sort of how it works?
Um, in some cases, yes. So I have an SEO background as well, and
Mm,
so
nice.
my emphasis is always going to be think about things from an SEO perspective as well,
Hmm.
right? So when it comes to things like Google Translate or translation tools that serve up a layer of content on top or instead of your English content, I think you wind up missing a massive opportunity for SEO work,
Hmm.
right? If if Google's not seeing, or AI tools now, right? AI search
Hmm.
is a thing. If the content is only served on demand, is it shown? Like, does Google catalog that? And do AI tools see that? If they're not searching for Spanish, then they're never going to trigger it. They never pull it up. They never see it. Well, you've put in all of this work to make your stamp in your target language, and then you miss all the SEO benefits.
Mm, yeah.
So I know it complicates your structure, and all of a sudden you've got twice as many, three times as many, four times as many pages because you have all your pages in Spanish and English and French and German. That's what my site is set up with: Spanish, English, French, and German.
Wow.
So, um, well, Spanish is the opportunity. French and German I speak. So, like, I'm actively recruiting for those languages. I believe I can provide a very unique value to them. Um, and I have team members who do the same for Spanish.
Mm.
Because I am not a native Spanish speaker, I have not put in the time. I need to make sure that I have people who do. So I believe having the content on site, even if served dynamically, but having it on your site where it can be crawled and
Mm.
indexed
Hmm.
and referred to is a SEO benefit. So I'm not against Weglot. If you're like, no, this is the thing, I'm absolutely using this. Okay, I'm not going to fight you. um, but if you come to me and say, hey, I'm looking at a WordPress installation, I want 2 to 3 languages, then I'm going to be like, okay, Polylang, WPML, both really stable, pros and cons. Here's like let's make a choice between a few of these solutions.
Mm.
Um, the other thing I like about some of the more traditional plugins rather than like Weglot's like, hey, we'll offer you X number of translations and will AI do it, which is convenient. But then you're constantly paying for new
Mm.
translation.
Mm.
If you have a native person and it's easy for them to do a lot of that work, then there's a cost benefit analysis to, do we want to go with a Weglot type service or do we want to go with something more traditional that maybe integrates with DeepL,
Hmm.
or so
Yeah.
that you can choose when you pull in
Yeah.
AI translated content more easily rather than it defaults, like you create the page and kind of defaults to translating all your stuff and charges you for it.
Right.
Um, so I am agnostic as to what plugin, as long as the customer has a reason for wanting the plugin they want. And
Mm.
the plugin does what it says it's going to do, and that it delivers, like for me, delivering an SEO benefit is something that I look for in plugins that I use.
Yes, that makes sense. What about Translate Press? Have you used that at all?
I have not used Translate Press yet.
I I remember we've used many of them through the years. WPML became a little too big for some cases where it was the overhead was large. But like everything, I mean, I don't see why they couldn't have gotten better with time. They're probably the ones that have been there the longest. Translate Press was great. We had some great experience with it, but then at the same time, we had some issues with some things. But their team was really good. I remember that about being. We would say, "Well, we can't find the string." They would say, "Oh, use this. way of figuring out what the string is, and it would help you. Like, there's actually people there. They would help you find that out and put it in, and having integrations with DeepL. So people who don't know what is DeepL, it's
Oh,
it's
yeah.
yeah, it's a translation API basically, right?
Yeah, it's an AI powered translation tool. It has a standalone web interface. You can use it as an API. Um, One neat thing about DeepL is that it's not it's a more deterministic LLM.
Mm-hmm.
So with a probabilistic LLM like ChatGPT, generative LLM like ChatGPT, it's programmed to think creatively to resolve the problem. So that's how you get those hallucinations. With a deterministic LLM, it's not as aggressively problem solving and creative, and you are more likely to get more consistent results. So if you say, "Hey, I had a good day today," you're going to get a very, very similar result every time.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with a ChatGPT translation, you'll get similar results, but the probability of those results varying is higher.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great way
So,
to put it. Yeah. And when we had a client in Quebec actually, and they had the site in English, French, of course, and German, I believe, and they used DeepL. And this was a long time ago, before all the LLM stuff came along, and it worked great even back then. So yeah, these tools, it's good to know that these tools exist. Like, use the LLMs for what they're good for, but then if you can, even if you're vibe coding something, you're asking it, now build it in Spanish, that's fine. But why don't you tell it, okay, build a structure, but then go and talk to DeepL or a tool that's specific for that to do the translation, then just put in the text, right? You don't actually have to waste tokens translating. Have a real translation tool, do the translation, and then just bring it into your content, maybe.
yeah, I've used DeepL for quite a few pieces of content, and it's been great until it's not.
Hmm.
And that's when you're like, oh, okay, good thing that I have somebody native reading this
Yes,
over. Oh.
yes, yes.
So, and that's with every LLM. Whatever you choose to translate, okay, great, more power to you. Feed your corrections back into the LLM afterwards, because that'll improve its accuracy. So,
Oh, that's great advice too. If someone wants to start doing this on their website, maybe they want to start translating some of their content or the full website, etc., and they want someone to help them, someone like you, and Manzanita Marketing. I love the name, by the way.
thank you.
It's how do they reach out? How do they find you to be able to get more information about what path they should be following?
Yeah, I'm available at Manzanita MKTG. That's my website. That's also most of my social handles. Manzanita, Manzanita MKTG. I am available on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. The best way to get in touch is my website or email, info@manzanitamktg.com.
Excellent. I'll put those in the show notes as well. Christina, you've shared such valuable advice. We haven't talked too much about localization on the show, except, of course, on the show with Joshua, but this went very deep into what we should think about when being a business owner, and what what we should be doing to service our local audience. And I really learned a lot. I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing all this. And for everyone who's listening, if you haven't liked and subscribed to the show, please do so. And please be sure to follow Christina as well. I'll leave those links in the show notes as well, so they can find you in the socials as well. Thanks a lot, Christina. It's been a blast.
Thanks, Armando. It was a pleasure. Bye.